Named after the ancient African city in Egypt, Memphis, Tennessee would be the final battleground for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is Vernon Ash reporting. Considered by many to be a modern-day prophet, in his short life of 39 years, Dr. King touched the hearts of millions in America and around the world, and his legacy of nonviolent direct action continues even decades after his passing. Later, you'll hear actor Moses Peace in his portrayal of Dr. King as he gives an inspired speech of this writer's thinking on what the slain civil rights leader might say if alive today. But first, some thoughts about Dr. King from exclusive interviews with historical figures who remember the prophet and the times. These reflections in history feature the former Stokely Carmichael, now known as Kwame Ture, Minister Louis Farrakhan, Reverend James Netters, photographer Ernest Withers, and the Reverend Samuel Kiles.
Not done in practice, loading film on a Nikon reel, developing it, and he had the super film of a century. So I asked him, was he having trouble, and if he was, to put the film in a box. So he put the film in the box. And I went in and took it out and rolled it on the two reels. But once he got the film, and we had two perfect rolls, developed well and clear and good, and a good development, he called New York and told him he had an exciting two rolls of film. What should he do? Then he started assessing his surroundings. He said, who's there? He said, the man Withers and another man, his photographer, and another man who's a deputy sheriff. Man, so you hire that deputy sheriff, you go, when you get off the phone, you tell him that he is hired as your bodyguard to guard you from anybody, even them two men, the photographer. They'll realize. Well, Bob Williams called from the Commercial Appeal and tried to get him to make the proof sheet and let the Commercial Appeal see the pictures, but he wouldn't do it. And we rode him to the airport. And we got out there. Jesse Jackson was at the airport.
Soon after Dr. King's body was transported to a Memphis funeral home, Withers was there to get another look at the man he had photographed so many times before.
The fact that Martin King had been assassinated certainly was a shaking experience. And when we went to Lewis's funeral home, see, most people don't know, Charles Hayes the embalmer for R.S. Lewis embalmed Martin Luther King. Charles Hayes was a dear friend of mine, a buddy, not no dear social. We were just buddies because I had been a policeman down there. R.S. Lewis was a friend of mine, but Charles Hayes was a more social buddy than even R.S. Lewis. We knew the lay of the land, the lay of the full floor plan. We'd been in and out of the morgue a number of times. The casket was across the alley in what would used to be the appliance company there. And when Abernathy, Ben Hooks, and that coalition went over there to select a casket, I just moseyed on through the door into the morgue. Into the morgue, Martin King lay on the table. His skull was there beside him, his nude body. I picked the skull up and put it back in his head and rolled his flesh back over even with in the scar, and rolled his skin, scalp-like, back in place. I doubt whether Charles Hayes or anybody else did anything else. That came to pick up the body. We were there the early morning when they put the body out for viewing. It wasn't any announced public viewing, but they had it sitting in state there, and the few cadre members that were there got a chance to see it. The members of the press got a chance. That's when I shot pictures of the body there in the funeral home. Shocked, yes. Disturbed, yes. Emotional, yes, because I had been up all night like everybody else with very little bit of sit-down catnapping, but there was an emotional trauma for me to just stay awake around the clock, you know. I mean, it was certainly unusual, but there was a reason to do so.
He coined the slogan Black Power. His name is Stokely Carmichael. After being brought to the United States at the age of 10, years later he was graduated from Howard University. Known today as Kwame Ture, the former Stokely Carmichael became one of the most well-known personalities during the Civil Rights Movement. He was no stranger to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and passionately remembers the man and the movement.
When the FBI killed Dr. King, they made an error. Of course, they had to decide, they had to kill people from the right, from Dr. King to the left. But their problem with King was that he was honest. And this is what their problem was. They couldn't corrupt him, neither materially nor immaterially. And they certainly came to understand this from his position in the war on Vietnam. Because once he took his position on the war in Vietnam, he was now attacking the government. So it meant the policy which he held to even during the march from Memphis to Jackson, this policy of still depending upon the federal government, was thrown out the window once he went for the war in Vietnam. And that's why he took such a long time to make this decision. Many people do not understand this, because it wasn't so much a position against the war in Vietnam, but he properly understood that once he took a position against the war in Vietnam, he was going against the federal government, and all of his strategy in the past would be thrown out the window. He could no longer depend upon the same federal government that he would now be forced to attack. And one of the beautiful things about King was his honesty. You know, in his speech on why I oppose the war on Vietnam, he has a phrase in there in which he says, there's a time when caution can become cowardice. He was speaking about himself.